There was a small town in the middle of nowhere that was known for its strange occurrences and haunted houses. Visitors would come from all over to visit the town and explore the various haunted destinations. Each destination had a specific story and atmosphere to give it a unique personality. There was one particular house that stood out as the creepiest of them all, though. It was an old, dilapidated mansion that had been abandoned for decades. Some said that the owner had gone mad and killed his family before disappearing without a trace. Others claimed that the house was cursed and anyone who entered it would meet their demise. The story of the house was definitely in question, as no one could pinpoint exactly what happened at the old house. How was it still standing after years of abandonment? The windows letting in the harsh environment all year was anyone's guess. As the windows were broken, letting in the harsh environment all year, it was anyone's guess. But it still stood tall, telling a story of what used to be elegance and luxury. It was a sight to see, that is, from the outside. As strange as it seems, the many visitors that came to the town would go to the old house and take pictures, but they would never go in the house. It was the weirdest thing. No matter how much they wanted to go, they didn't want to go in the house when the time came. There was some kind of odd groupthink that made a group standing outside the old house look at each other and decide collectively not to enter the front door. They would walk the perimeter. They would look in the windows and doors, but something compelled them to think twice before entering the house. It is probably that mysterious force that has saved many lives. Despite the rumors, a group of thrill-seeking teenagers decided to explore the house one night. They had all been hanging out together and taking some substance that didn't even have a street name yet. They were playing Ghost in the Graveyard at an actual graveyard. As the effects of the substance was going through their body, they were all laughing and having the time of their lives. After the full effects were felt, they all looked at each other almost at the same time. It was time to explore the old house once and for all. They all rode together to the house. There it was, the 3-story house that would have been considered a mansion back in its time. It stood tall and intimidating, but it was no match for the group. Together, they all walked right through the door. There was no external presence this time, though, no voice telling them to stop. They all entered the house. As they entered, they were greeted by the musty smell of decay and the creaking of old floorboards. There was total silence at first, but a windy howl could be heard that got progressively louder over time. As they started to walk through the house, every step made a loud, creaking sound. It felt like the floor could cave in at any minute. Because they were on something, the creaks were deafening. They could hear every creak every time they stepped. They could hear every plank of wood compress as their feet applied pressure. With this, their hearts began to beat heavier and heavier, which they also felt. However, they felt like their heart was physically moving their shirts with every beat. Their heartbeat felt like that heavy feeling you felt when standing next to a big speaker. Suddenly, their thoughts had sobered up. As they proceeded, they all looked at each other wondering if this was a good idea. They cautiously made their way through the dark, cramped corridors, each step echoing loudly in silence. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise behind them in the long hallway. They had gone from a little scared to absolutely terrified. No one wanted to turn and see what had just made the noise, but they had to. One of them got the courage. They turned and saw a ghostly figure levitated above the ground and coming right towards the group. The teenagers screamed and ran out of the hallway as fast as they possibly could, knocking down picture frames. 3 of the teenagers had escaped the house, with one more heading towards the door. Suddenly, a chair slid across the room and went right under the teenager's legs, knocking him on his back. As the teenager looked up in pain, he could see a beautiful chandelier that had been consumed with cobwebs over time. His view of the beautiful man-made spectacle was short-lived, as he saw it rushing towards his face. It collapsed on his head perfectly, causing fatal damage to his skull. The other guys saw it happen and ran for their lives. When the group was a safe distance away from the house, they called the police. When the cops arrived, they said it was an accident. They all knew better. It was an angry ghost that did not like anyone intruding on its property. Be careful taking substances, but especially if you're going to explore haunted places. The teenagers never got the warning that everybody else got, to stay away from the house, because their decision-making abilities were inhibited, blocking the only friendly voice that was there to protect people from entering the dangerous house. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Happy exploring, everybody. A group of friends were driving through the deserted countryside in the middle of nowhere. The land was barren, with no buildings or cars. They were all talking about the road trip they were on, and all the fun they were having getting together once again. They were all friends from a long time ago, and they were doing a cross-country through Utah. There were many hiking trails and rock formations for visitors to explore, but where they currently were was nothing. Suddenly, they spotted a woman walking on the side of the road. She was dressed in ragged clothes and seemed lost and alone. She looked like she had been through a lot. The friends stopped the car after passing the woman by. They all looked at each other and thought of the situation. There was a woman in the middle of nowhere. Her clothes were tattered, and she looked scary, to be perfectly honest. However, they could not just leave her. They can't just let her walk in this desolate landscape by herself. She looked like she needed help. They all decided that they would have to take a chance on this unknown woman. They backed up the car on the empty road and pulled up beside the woman. They asked her if she needed a ride, and she gratefully accepted. Through the initial conversation, the woman seemed like a very thoughtful person, and definitely just in need of some assistance. Suddenly, they felt much better about the whole thing. The woman got in the car, and they took off. As they drove on, the woman told them her story of how she had been lost. She lost all the members of her party and had been wandering the woods and eventually found a road. She had been stranded for days with only a little water left. The group had just picked her up when she had lost all hope. They all carried themselves proudly as saviors. The girl got in the car and they took off. They had been driving for a while and finally started to see buildings in the distance. It was the first town for miles. There was no doubt in any of their minds that the woman was not going to make it. But as they approached the town, they were all looking out their windows at the old but populated town. They all looked back at the woman. She was no longer sitting in the back middle seat. She was just gone. They pulled into a gas station and called the police. They reported picking the woman up at mile marker 37 and gave a detailed description of what she looked like. The police combed the area and found a body. It was the girl that matched the description of their passenger. In reality, she didn't make it. It turns out that she had been taken to the woods by her husband. He led her deep in the woods and left her on purpose, taking her backpack when she was not looking. She looked for him but never found him. She did not know that he had betrayed her. She wandered around until she found the road. She tried to follow it until she saw a car or found civilization. Little did she know that she had also been poisoned. On the walk, she had started to feel sick from the poison her husband laced in her Mio-flavored water. She finally fell down to her knees and collapsed. Her lifeless body had been there for weeks, and no one driving could see it as it was covered up by desert plants. During the autopsy, the toxicology report showed the poison. The main suspect, her husband, was picked up by the police shortly after the girl was identified. Justice would be served, all because a group of friends decided to do the right thing and help someone out in need. Be careful out there on road trips. Maybe if you find someone that needs your help, you can bring justice to a restless spirit. Hey, Spooky Sooner here. I just want to thank everybody. I reached 100 subscribers. It's a big milestone. So the next video I'm going to do is about dates from hell. So I'm going to start working on that now. And I hope to get it out in the next 2 weeks. So thanks for everybody and stay spooky. She tried to follow it until she saw a court. She tried to follow it until she saw a car